There we go. Thank you for the reminder.
Oh, guys, we really appreciate you being here. What better activity on a beautiful West Michigan evening like this? I guess we can't complain. My name is Justin Roebuck, for those of you who don't know me. And this is Katie Sims, your elections coordinator. Just thought I'd kind of kick us off a little bit here and talk a little bit. This is such an important topic, and we really appreciate you guys being here. I think this is an issue that really matters probably every single one of us in this room. And we really feel like it's important to engage on a conversational level with people and be able to have this back and forth dialogue. What are the questions that you have? What are the things that you're thinking about as we walk into this election in the coming days and afterwards, right? And where are the areas we can improve and do better? I am a strong believer in complete transparency and openness in the elections process. And this is the last actually of a series of town halls that we've been doing called Community Conversations. We just want to talk with you guys about what is on your mind with regard to election, particularly to ways that you think, feedback that you can give us about how we can do the process better. So what we're going to do tonight, I'll just kick it off a little bit. We're going to walk through about a 15-minute brief overview of, frankly, some of the ways that I really appreciate about how our elections are run, and then talk through some ways that I think we could be doing things better. This is not a perfect system. There are many ways that our process could improve, and I think we need to talk through that as a community. So we're going to share a couple of our ideas and thoughts. And then we really just want to hear from you. So we are live streaming as well. So if you guys watching the live stream have a question, concern, you want a question answered tonight, feel free to drop that in the chat, either on YouTube. I'm sorry, Zoom.
YouTube.
Just YouTube. Okay, so drop it in the chat on YouTube. We're monitoring that. We want to look at that and answer your questions as well. We've also had some folks email us questions ahead of time, and really appreciate that. We'll definitely be answering those. And we have cards on your seats as well. So feel free to write those questions out. We have Simone in the back. Sorry, I didn't really introduce our team, and I apologize for that. So from my left to right is Madison Schneid, who's our administrative person. She's amazing. Keeps me in line and a lot of other people. Chelsea from Loudoun Library, who is an honorary member of our team. We love her. Simone Johnson, who's our election assistant. Quentin Proctor, who is our intern from GVSU, served with us for a few months now. So we really appreciate all of them. So anyway, I want to kick it off a little bit. Just really briefly, I guess, to tell you a little bit about where I came from in this process. I was a political nerd for most of my life as a young kid. I worked for Terry Lynn Land when she was the Secretary of State, and I was quite a bit younger. And so it really got the bug, I guess, for election administration at that point, just kind of behind the scenes, the way that the process worked. And I also worked for Congressman Tim Walberg, who represented, trying to remember what the district number is now, but it was the 7th district in Michigan before coming here to Ottawa County. And so I came here in 2009 as the election coordinator in Katie's position, and I have served since then. I was appointed county clerk in 2014 and was elected in 16 and 20. So that's a little bit about me. And Katie, you can take it over from there.
Much briefer history. I grew up in the Illinois area and came over to Michigan, thankfully. But weather's way nicer here some days. But I came over to go to Grand Valley, and at my time at Grand Valley, I was a political science major, switched to international relations, and I kind of knew I wanted to do something in government, but wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I saw an internship that was posted for our office, so I was in Quentin's current role. I was our elections intern in 2016, and then in 2018, I actually moved to Maddie's role now. I was in a specialist role for a while. And then in 2021, I moved to the elections coordinator role, and I've been in this role for the last couple of years now. I also caught the elections bug, as many people do who are in this industry, just from learning and experiencing it, and loved it. And was like, great, this is what I want to do. life path solved. So here I am, excited to be here with you guys, and thank you for coming.
So again, just want to kick it off a little bit with a couple of key points that we feel like are important to think about. Elections in the state of Michigan and really around the country revolve around a couple of really key issues. They are bipartisan. They have to be by law. Particularly in the state of Michigan, we have very fundamental rules around bipartisanship in our elections process. In the precincts, in the certification and the canvassing process, there are a number of checks and balances that utilize bipartisanship in that process. They are also by law required to be transparent. From the testing of the equipment, we'll talk a little bit about more of this stuff as we get into it too, but from the testing of the equipment and the way that that is conducted through election day, as you see voters walking into the precincts, the process is transparent. It has to be transparent. And it's really critical that it is transparent. And I think we have some ideas about how it can be more transparent. So we'll talk about that too. And it is run by professionals. Believe it or not, we did not wake up last night or this morning and say, oh man, there's an election coming up in a couple of weeks. We gotta get ready for it. This is something that election professionals, and I don't want to single anybody out, but we have a few election officials in the room. I am so grateful for our local clerks. And this is really a partnership, particularly in the state of Michigan, where we're so decentralized. We have 23 local jurisdictions just in Ottawa County. And these guys are professionals. They are certified and trained to do what they do, but they also plan for this for a year. I mean, we've been getting ready for November 8th, really since January, February of this year. So those are key points in the process as well.
I mentioned 2024 this morning, and our staff was like, whoa, we got to get through 22. And I was like, my mind's already thinking about the future. So as Justin mentioned, Michigan is a really decentralized process. We work closely with our city and township clerks to administer the elections process. There's quite a few things listed on this screen as just kind of some overview of local clerk responsibilities and county clerk responsibilities. I am not going to go through all of those because we're going to touch on almost all of them in the coming slides, but just to give you a good idea of how those responsibilities are shared in the state. So this graphic is what we refer to as the life cycle of an election. It really covers kind of the 8 basic things that go into every election that we administer here in the county. It starts with step number 1, which is the candidates file for office. And we're going to kind of briefly walk through each of the steps. So candidates, depending on what level of office a candidate's filing for, they're going to file with the Secretary of State's office, with our office at the county level, or with the city or township clerk's office. All candidates that file an affidavit of identity, some basic contact information on what office the person wants to run for. And then they also file either petition signatures or they pay a filing fee. That's dependent on which office they're running for. If someone has the option to pay the filing fee, the number of signatures is dependent on the size of the office. So a school board candidate in Ottawa County has to collect a minimum of 40 signatures, but you have statewide offices that are collecting hundreds of thousands. Actually, I think they're 30,000 signatures for governor. So it kind of depends on the size of the office. After,
I'm sorry. Oh, I don't know. I think so. Talk a little bit about ballot programming. After that filing process happens, it's a critical step in the process. And Ottawa County does this in-house. We don't farm this out to any other third-party vendor. We have very specific and fairly strict controls around the programming process. The programming equipment is never connected to the internet. It is always completely siloed and separate. It's actually contained in a separate room that's under lock and key. It's under 24-hour video surveillance. We have key card access to that room with only a few individuals on our team who are allowed access to that. And then the audit controls in the programming process are very detailed. It tells you who's logged in, when they have logged in, what they did when they logged in, what time it was. And so all of those things are subject to our internal and external audit controls, and it's very important. But it's a lot of data. When you think about it, our August election, for example, had 468 candidates on it. We had a number of local proposals as well. So that's a lot of data, and the November election, has an equal number of a lot of candidates on it, right? So after that programming is done, we're then proofing the ballot, and that goes through a multi-stage level of proofing where we're doing internal proofing first. Then we actually hire out people who are professional proofers and do this work specifically. And then we send those proofs to our local clerks. Again, an integral part of the system are our 23 local jurisdiction clerks. So these guys are also taking a look and proofing their part of the process before we ever produce a ballot and send that to the printer. So our ballots are printed here in Michigan, and then the printed ballots are delivered to the offices of the local clerks. Local clerks have ballots. So your ballots are kept in your community, they're issued in your community, and they're counted in your community. I think this is mine too, I apologize, okay. So the logic and accuracy testing, another part of the transparency of the process is how we test the equipment. Every single piece of equipment utilized in an election is required to be tested. And to undergo this testing, we're running a series of ballots through the equipment, and these are done in public meetings. These are meetings that we advertise in newspapers of general circulation in the community, but we're also putting this out on social media saying, guys, come watch, be a part of the process. And we're marking ballots according to a specific standard of how we need to mark them. Some ballots are mismarked, some ballots are marked correctly. We need to make sure that the equipment knows the difference and will alert a voter, for example, if they make a mistake on their ballot. We need to know that the equipment itself will count properly, but we also need to know the mechanics are functioning right. That we need to make sure the screws are tightened and the machine itself is in proper working order. And so all of that is done in the public logic and accuracy test.
So 45 days before an election, absentee ballots are available. So it's often vote by mail, vote at home, kind of interchangeable terms. In Michigan, we use the term absentee ballot. So in Michigan right now, any registered voter can request an absentee ballot. They have to submit an application to their city or township clerk's office. When the city or township clerk's office gets that application, they're verifying that the signature of the voter matches the signature on file of the voter's registration. If those two items match, the clerk is going to issue that voter a ballot. When the ballots are returned, they're returned in a sealed envelope that has a signature on the outside as well. So that signature, once again, is verified against the application and the voter registration, the voter's registration. And if those two things match, the local clerks are storing those sealed envelopes until election day. There was some recent legislation that passed 2 or 3 weeks ago now that allows jurisdictions that are over 10,000 voters in population to begin pre-processing absentee ballots up to 2 days before the election. So we might see that across the state. Here in Ottawa County, the city of Holland has indicated that they will be taking advantage of that and begin pre-processing ballots. So once ballots are securely stored on election day or during the pre-processing period, they're delivered to what is called the Absent Voter Counting Board. That again is a bipartisan board of election workers who have been trained by us at the county level to process those absentee ballots. So they're working in bipartisan teams, opening the envelopes, verifying the number of ballots they have, scanning those ballots through the tabulator, and they're sequestered throughout the day. So it's also open to an observer. So if a poll challenger, a poll watcher wants to watch this process, they have the right to do so. Anyone can observe that process, but they are also currently sequestered with the Absent Voter Counting Board throughout the day. So on election day, again, precincts, absent voter counting boards are bipartisan, working together throughout the day. In Ottawa County right now, we have 106 precincts and 20-something, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, absent voter counting boards. So we will see all of those groups of workers. It requires about 1,000+ election workers that we train and that are out in the field working on election day. The precincts and the absent voter counting boards are also subject to independent observation. So there is an area in every precinct that is sectioned off for any member of the public who wants to go in and observe the process happening as voters are coming through their precinct to cast their ballot. They're also open to poll challengers. So members of a political party or an organization give us notice ahead of time that they will be attending different precincts or counting boards in our county. And we let their clerks know so that they can prepare for that as well. But those challengers have a few different rights. They're allowed to see different areas of the process, including the poll book, which has the list of registered voters for that precinct on it. And then we also since 2018 is same-day voter registration. So local clerk offices now are open on election day to voters who are coming in and registering to vote on the same day of the election. Anyone who does that does have to provide a photo ID and proof of residency. Once that independent check is verified that the voter is eligible to cast a ballot in that precinct or in that jurisdiction, that voter has the option to vote an absentee ballot at the clerk's office, or they can head over to their precinct and cast a ballot there. The great thing about this process is it's updated in real time. So there's a great security check that if a voter walked into a precinct or into a clerk's office here in the city of Grand Haven, that they couldn't just walk right next door to the Grand Haven Township, for example, and register to vote there at the same time on election day. You're only allowed to do that once, and the system does flag that. So one of our main responsibilities on election night at the county level is to produce and report on unofficial results from the precincts. So we get this data in several different ways. We have multiple backups of it. So we always have the paper totals tapes that come out of the machines on election night in the precincts and the counting boards. Additionally, we have the actual hard backup copy that's on the tabulator. And then we also have an external drive that gets delivered to our office on election night that contains the unofficial results as well. So we work on a kiosk computer in our office to actually de-encrypt those results. We get them to put them on a new drive and get them to our IT guy who has a laptop that is connected to the internet. And then he works to produce those results on our website. We report results as we receive them. So we're updating our results website several times throughout the night. Typically our first results come up around 8:45 or so, and then we continue on through the night until we have all of the results for the county. You want?
Sure. Really important part of the process is the certification. So all of the results that come in on election night and afterwards are unofficial until the certification process happens at the Board of County Canvassers level. So these are 4 individuals, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. They're independently appointed. Our office serves as the clerk of the Board of Canvassers. We're non-voting, but we do assist them in their work. And they do a really important task. They are essentially there opening up the poll books for every single precinct in the county. They're looking at the totals tapes that printed out of the equipment on election night. So they're verifying that the number of ballots on those totals tapes match the number of voters who are registered in the poll books. They're looking at the itemized lists to make sure that the election workers have signed off and sealed everything properly. And this is a process that takes days, particularly in a large election. We have a 14-day window. That is 14 days, calendar days, not business days. And so occasionally in a large election, we're working through the weekend with our canvassers, making sure that we can complete that task within the 14 days allotted as well. But it's a very critical piece of the verification. They also have the power to correct errors. So if there's an imbalance somehow in the precinct, a good example of this is a ballot gets a potential ballot jam in the tabulator, and a ballot gets run through the tabulator twice. So we have now an imbalance. We have 1 more ballot than we have voters. That is an error that the Board of Canvassers needs to correct under law before they certify the election. And they do that. They subpoena the ballots to come before them. The local clerk and often the election workers are present. We actually open the sealed container under the authority of the Board of Canvassers, and we do a retabulation before, and to make sure that that number is accurate and correct before we certify the election. So that's a very important piece of it as well. Oh, sorry. We get our act together. I think you're doing great though.
I'm great too.
Post-election audits. This is really critical, and really we've been doing post-election audits. They're new, which is kind of interesting to me. Since 2012 in Michigan, we've been required to do some level of post-election auditing. And the audit is very detailed. Since 2018, it's actually a part of the Michigan Constitution. We're required by the Constitution to do them as well as by the statute. It is a 77-point checklist that we're going over that covers multiple factors and multiple areas of the election. So were the notices properly sent out? Were the election workers properly appointed by the Election Commission in a public meeting? Are the election workers representing a bipartisan split? And then we're also doing an actual hand count of the ballots. So we are actually counting the number of ballots that are contained in the precinct, making sure that that hand counted number matches, again, what was on that totals tape that our Board of Canvassers certified. And then we do a physical hand count of an office that is randomly selected on the ballot. So in the last cycle, it was the President of the United States and in the Michigan Senate. We actually did 2 of those offices in 2020. In other years, I think it was the governor's race and the primary. So we're actually physically hand counting to make sure that the number of ballots matches what the machine totals say. And also verifying the applications to vote. So we make sure to have the applications to vote must match the number of ballots that we have. And those applications have to be properly completed by the voters and signed by the voters. And I think that gets into some of the things too that, again, I really believe we have a strong process. We have a really strong foundation. We've been doing elections for a long time. Our laws have been on the books for a long time. Some of them need to be updated. Some of them need to be changed. I think it's really important that we take a look at the transparency issues and focus on what we need to do to improve elections in Michigan. And actually, a couple of these things literally just happened as the legislature passed a law that, it's regarding pre-processing of absentee ballots, but also does a couple of other things as well. So again, additional processing time and fewer restrictions for observers. The processing time for absentee ballots is really important for a couple of reasons: accuracy and transparency. So to me, if we're processing absentee ballots into the middle of the night, trying to get results in a timely fashion for our voters, and if you are an observer, or if you're trying to recruit an observer, is it easier to recruit somebody to come at 3 in the morning at the absentee counting board on a Wednesday morning following the election? Or would it be easier to recruit them to come at Monday morning at 10 a.m.? I think the transparency element is really important. And if we back this up, and again, Michigan's absentee voting law changed substantially in 2018 to allow for what we call no reason absentee voting. So the number of absentee ballots have increased dramatically. We need to make sure that we have the right infrastructure in place to also provide that transparency piece. So it's really important. Legislature allowed for 2 extra days of what we call pre-processing. So we are doing a number of security checks on those ballots, but we're actually not tabulating the ballots under current law. Michigan's pretty unique in that the other 19 states or so that have these laws on the books actually allow for tabulation of the ballots early. They're locked up and sealed up. Again, they're done by bipartisan boards, all of that stuff early. Michigan's a little bit different. We're not tabulating ballots, but we are running through a lot of security checks in the process. So that literally just happened a couple of weeks ago. Important to be able to allow observers better access to absentee ballot issuance. So, and these are challenges that we just haven't dealt with legislatively yet because of the increase of absentee ballots. So for example, it's very difficult for a challenger observer to walk into a local clerk's office where ballots are being issued and to be able to really see behind the scenes of what is going on there. I mean, they can stand in a public area and observe voters walking in and getting ballots, but it's not really the full process of what they would see as a challenger, for example, on election day. So I think the challenge for us as election officials is to say, we need to figure out ways that we can provide maximum transparency in the way that we operate and issue ballots to voters. But the law has to change in order for us to do that. This is super important to me as well. A couple of these things requiring training for poll challengers. So right now, poll challengers and observers don't have to take training. They are provided certain training by their organizations, depending on how the organizations manage that process, but they are not required to take specific training. And that results, unfortunately, in challengers at a disadvantage. If you're in observing a process and you don't exactly know what's going on, it's very easy for you to read into that process something different. And it's also can be challenging for the election officials who are conducting the process, because then is not really the time for them to educate a challenger, right? They have to do the work of processing the voters. The other really critical thing here is mandating that post-election audits are public. We're mentioning the 2012 law, Michigan Constitution change. Post-election audits are currently not required to be public. We make them public. I think that's a huge value. We started that in 2020, just recognizing the need to make sure that we are as fully transparent with the audit process as we can be. There's 32 hours of wonderful YouTube video footage of our presidential election audit on YouTube if you're ever looking for a good, relaxing evening. But I think it's really important. Just as the logic and accuracy test is public, we need to make sure that this audit process is also. Another time issue that I think is really important, and this is kind of a big change would be a big change for Michigan, moving our primary election from August to June. So that'll allow a bigger window, a 5-month window essentially of time for the election process to take place. When you think about it, there are very, very tight timelines between the August primary and the November election. We have a 45-day deadline to have ballots on hand, 45 days before any election for our military and overseas voters. And that means the printing and the proofing and litigation that inevitably happens before an election is really in a crunch zone. And again, that affects accuracy, and it can affect transparency as well when we talk about how we conduct post-election audits in between an August and November election. Really important to be able to have that additional time. And there are about 36 other states that have primaries later, earlier in the process than Michigan does. Only a couple of exceptions. I know Massachusetts, I think, and Rhode Island, a couple of Eastern, and New Hampshire, maybe a couple of East Coast states that actually have later primary dates, and that is a real crunch. Allowing county clerks to remove deceased voters from a database from the qualified voter file. This is low-hanging fruit, simple. I get death records. I'm a county clerk. I have the ability, our staff has the ability to notify local clerks immediately when someone is deceased. And this takes out a timeline that is really important, especially leading up to elections, to make sure that we have accurate voter rolls. Another thing that is important in my mind is the idea that we pre-register 16-year-olds. So when they come into the branch office of the Secretary of State, when a 16-year-old comes in, they're coming in with their ID, they're coming in with their birth certificate in most cases, they're coming in with a lot of identifying information, and they're coming in person. Great opportunity for them to get put on the roll so that their voter registration actually takes effect when they turn 18, because we don't see them again at Secretary of State's office until later. So what happens right now, particularly with early registration, or excuse me, with same-day registration, and I guess late voter registration, we're having a lot of 18-year-olds, a lot of folks in that gap that came when they were 16, but they haven't been back. Maybe they're a freshman in college or they're graduating high school. They're coming in to local clerk's offices to same-day register, and this process would really allow them to be already on the rolls and ready to go and already identified. Another really important component for me, and something that I'm really passionate about as we look at the future of election administration, we have to fund this. This is really important. Elections are critical. In fact, they are critical infrastructure. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security in 2016 designated elections as critical infrastructure. So we are on the same page as our nuclear energy system, as major transportation organizations. So this is important. It's important to all of us. And the reality is, nationwide, election offices occupy about 2% of their municipal budget. So there's a fascinating stat that literally the vast majority of municipalities spend more on parking, not even parks, but parking than they do elections. So we really need to rethink this, particularly in the environment that we're in, where it's more important than ever for us to be transparent, for us to be professional at what we do, and for us to be able to have the resources to make sure that our community knows those things. And so, yeah, those are some of the really critical things that we feel like can be better. There's a lot more. I'm eager to hear you guys at this point, and hear some of your thoughts, questions, suggestions. I don't know that, I think we have folks going around who are going to collect some cards as well. I'm sorry.
If you write down questions, it'll be multiple questions on one card, one question. I think some places have more cards. Quentin on our team, just hold it up. He'll come around and grab it. And then Simone on our team will be reading those questions off to us. If you need more note cards, let us know. We have plenty more, and we're happy to give you more if you have more questions.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Quentin. Simone, do we have like an email question or something we can read while we wait?
Lou? Yes, we have a lot of questions. We'll get started with some of the email ones. What kind of work is being done to keep our voter rolls updated? In the primary election, a friend shared that her mother had received an absentee ballot even though she passed in 2020.
So it's an interesting question. I'd love to follow up with that person as well, because maintenance of the voter rolls is critical. We have 8 million records in the state of Michigan on our voter rolls, and they're changing every day. On average, we have about 300 people a day who pass away in the state of Michigan, and there's a number of ways that is checked. I talked a little bit about the importance of allowing local county clerks to help with that. But there's a couple of ways. So Social Security Administration on a monthly basis sends a list to the Secretary of State's office, and voters are removed from those rolls. We've had about 180,000 voters removed from the rolls that way since 2019. Another way that voters come off the rolls who are deceased is from our office. When we get a death record, we're compiling that information. We look the voter up, see where they are registered, if they're registered to vote. And then on a monthly basis, currently the law required, previously, literally a couple of weeks ago, the law required me to snail mail a copy of that information to each local clerk. And so what we've been doing for a long time is sending that electronically. As it gets closer to the election, we send it more quickly, not just monthly, but we're sending it weekly. So now this new legislation will also allow us to essentially, in the qualified voter file, flag that voter as having been deceased, and that will help even further. The other thing that our local clerks do for a living, which is super exciting, is read obituaries. So that is important as well. They are looking in their community. I mean, think about it. This happens at the local level. Clerks in your community are looking to see who is deceased and who may still be on my voter rolls. So I'd be very interested, for one thing, to get a ballot in the mail. You have to apply for a ballot. So somebody who is deceased in 2020 may have received an application for a ballot. But the only way they could have gotten a ballot was if someone filled that application out, signed their name, and mailed it back to the local clerk, and then they would receive a ballot after signature verification. So kind of an important distinction there, but it is a process that a lot of people, it is confusing because quite often you get an absentee ballot application in the mail, it says ballot on the front of it, on the envelope. It looks like it's official. And so I think that there's confusion there between what's a ballot and what's an application for a ballot. But a great question. And honestly, I'm happy to follow up with that email and get a little more info.
I think a couple other things, and a lot of what Justin just shared was about voters who are deceased. For voters who are not deceased, the voter registration list is also getting updated regularly. So Michigan is what we call a voter state. So our driver's license and state IDs from the Secretary of State's office is tied to the voter registration. So anytime a voter goes into their Secretary of State's office, let's say they moved to somewhere else in the state, and they're updating their driver's license or their state ID, their voter registration follows them to that new place. So they don't have to re-register at the new place, and they're automatically moved over, so they're not still registered at their old address. Michigan is also part of what is called ERIC. It's the Electronic Registration Information Center. It's a multi-state, I think there's about 34 states now that are a part of this program that does two things. The first thing it does is an interstate check to verify that someone's not registered to vote in this state and in another state. The Secretary of State's office receives that list and then acts on that information. The second thing that that list does is it verifies that no one cast a ballot in two states. So if someone doesn't happen to be registered in two states, that doesn't get caught. It does do a check to make sure that a ballot wasn't cast in both states as well. Thank you very much.
Our next one is from YouTube, and it's kind of a two-part. Why is Ottawa County not using the imaging function on the tabulators? And then what is the purpose of ballot imaging?
That is a great question. And we have talked to people in the community about this imaging function as well. This is kind of an issue that's come up a couple of times by some concerned groups in the process, really relating back to 2016 and the presidential election in 2016. You remember that was a really close election here in Michigan. President Trump won by a little over 10,000 votes. We had a lot of concern from that at that time coming from, I'd say, maybe more liberal or left-leaning folks or organizations who were concerned that we were not using this particular function on our equipment. And this is something new with new voting equipment that we purchased in 2016, early 2016, basically. Basically, the imaging function allows a ballot to be photographed as it goes through the equipment. So the equipment is, you're scanning a ballot in, and it's taking a digital image of that entire ballot. And then that is stored on a flash drive and stored later for use either in our office or wherever it belongs. So a couple of the challenges that we were running into in the RFP process, and I was served on the state's RFP committee for purchase of new equipment, was that the time it was taking to image these ballots. So if you imagine like in a precinct, an average precinct where 1,000, 1,500 or 2,000 ballots get scanned, it's like a computer that starts really slowing down when it has a lot on the hard drive, when it has a lot of memory being taken up. And we even see some of this slowing down even without the image scanning. But what it was doing was effectively making the imaging very, very difficult. And the actual casting of ballots was difficult. And there's another challenge that we have legally with the process, and that is that we don't, at the county level, and this is county equipment and county, the results portion of the election responsibilities are the counties. And the county does not have the authority to store ballots. That belongs by law in the hands of our local clerks. And we have those paper ballots. They are required to be on hand for any federal election for 22 months. Those paper ballots are there and they're accessible and available. So we, as basically a user group, we use Heart Hunter Civic, made this decision to say we can't image the ballots because of the time delay that it's taking to scan that ballot through. So imagine a voter standing there for 20, 30, 40, up to a minute waiting for their ballot to scan is complicated. But then imagine an absentee county board that's scanning 7,000 to 8,000 ballots and how much time that is going to take. So effectively, it was a new feature on the equipment that frankly, I like the idea of, but I don't think there was a whole lot of real thought that went into it from the vendor perspective. It wasn't something that we're required to do, but it was also a hindrance. And so that's the challenge that we faced with the ballot images. But I think it's also important to note, we have the ballots. The paper ballots are available. Paper ballots are on hand for a 22-month period after every election where a federal candidate is on the ballot. And we audit those ballots. We audit them at the Board of Canvassers level. We audit them at the post-election audit level too. So it's a great question.
We're going to follow up to that question as well. Can we FOIA the ballot imaging?
So the ballot imaging, no, because the program, it's not that feature's not turned on, but what a voter can do is FOIA request the ballots, and you can FOIA request the clerks take photocopies of the ballot. So you can get digital copies of a ballot from a local clerk.
So that's another challenge that we face with FOIA law and with decentralization. It's all over the map, right? Because one jurisdiction may have 400 ballots that were cast because they're one precinct, and the clerk has, a free Wednesday afternoon and can sit in front of a scanner or something else. Another clerk has 42,000 ballots that they have physically, and that's going to take more time. The ballots are in a big election like this one coming up, they're 20 inches long. And so what is the effective way of getting to that process? Michigan is interesting because in some states, ballots are not subject to FOIA. In Michigan, they are, but it requires a local clerk physically to handle all the ballots, or a deputy. And so that is another challenge. You could be in a room physically if you want to look at ballots, or you can obtain copies of ballots, but it is a challenge to do that. And so I think at the end of the day, ballot imaging is where we need to go. And I think it's more open transparency. It's better transparency in the process. The ballots are available and they are subject to FOIA, but the challenge is that decentralization and the ability that some jurisdictions have that others do not. And it's a huge challenge. I can't give you a number.
It varies depending on the jurisdiction.
But under Michigan FOIA law, it costs the salary of the lowest paid employee who is able to physically handle a ballot, which is the clerk or the deputy clerk, typically a deputy clerk, depending though, sometimes clerks are actually paid less than deputies because clerks are part-time, blah, blah, blah. So it's the lowest paid person's salary under Michigan Freedom of Information Act.
You're saying 40,000 would be the lowest? What do you have to pay for a year? Do you have to pay for that day?
You would pay for the time it takes to, so let's say they have 400 ballots and it takes them 4 hours to photocopy all of those ballots. Whatever the 4 hours worth of that clerk's salary's time is, or the deputy clerk, whatever it is. Yep.
But the scanner takes that away. The image casting function, it takes that whole scanning process that they would have to go back and do it. Right?
Well, I think we touched on that. The process of scanning at the scanner itself, at the ballot tabulator, is that what you're talking about? That process is a serious impediment to the actual voter casting their ballot, which is fundamentally the thing that the tabulator is supposed to do. So when comparing those two issues, we're saying like, well, do we take 8 days to process ballots in this tabulator? Or do we maybe get to a point where we can actually utilize that function better in the functionality of the software? And that's where we're at. Simone, sorry, I think we've got a bunch of written questions, so feel free to
write it down.
Or we can talk later. Sure.
Okay, just a couple clarifying questions over here. What voting machines are used in Ottawa County, and do they have capabilities to connect to wireless internet connection? Any associated with Dominion, questions like that.
So there are 3 election vendors that were approved by the Secretary of State's office in 2016 during that RFP process. The counties each had the choice. So in Ottawa County, we use Hart InterCivic. They're a company that's based out of Austin, Texas. We've used them. We use their Verity system. They've got a few different types of systems. We use the Verity Scan and the Verity TouchWriter system. So every precinct has both a scan or a tabulator, they're interchangeable terms. That's what's actually reading the ballot. And then the other piece of equipment that's in every precinct is a TouchWriter. Essentially, it is a fancy ballot marking device for voters who have disabilities. So if a voter maybe is visually impaired, that device will actually read the ballot to them. So it's either, I think this election is my voice. So if someone uses that ballot tabulator or the ballot TouchWriter on election day, it's going to my voice reading to them. That's a great question.
So on the
can they connect to the
I was just gonna say,
Sorry,
internet
second half of the
connection
question.
I think that it's really important. So Ottawa County, along with a lot of other Michigan counties currently, as of right now, uses a modeming process, which is called, it's basically a secure wireless network, a VPN network that connects directly to a siloed computer in our office that's separate from our programming device. And it only connects after the tabulator has closed and printed a totals tape. And that is how unofficial results get electronically transmitted to our office on election night. So this is a backup process. Is how we receive unofficial results. And the election equipment is required to be off before the modem engages, because we have evidence of that based on the totals tape that's just printed from the device. And so there's a lot of checks and balances in that process. There's also an audit log that we can review. So we can review the records with the cell phone company. We can review the audit log of the actual tabulator to see when that happens. And again, these are unofficial results that are then later verified by our Board of County Canvassers, and then later audited by a physical hand count of the ballots. A lot of steps in that process. All that being said, I think, unfortunately, that's not a great elevator pitch to a lot of people. I don't know about you guys. It's not an elevator pitch. If you give me 20 minutes, I could probably tell you that I think everything we do is a risk reward decision, right? Ultimately, the actual physical memory stick device that comes to us under seal, if we don't have an electronic backup of that process, someone at 2 in the morning could go off the road, get into an accident, and lose that device. That's also a risk. We are dealing with risks in everything that we do, and our job is to mitigate those risks to the greatest extent we possibly can, and to make sure that our results are secure. And so at the end of the day, it's difficult, because, to be honest with you, I don't like the fact that we are putting a device in the tabulator that has an external factor to it. And we're moving away from that. In fact, we're piloting a couple of projects right now where we've worked closely with our sheriff's department to pilot a project where the deputies are physically retrieving results. We're also piloting a project in November where we have GPS tracking devices that are attached to the physical containers, the sealed containers that people will be using, so we can actually monitor where those results are. So again, we're trying to mitigate risk as much as we possibly can. But for us, it's important to have some layer of backup of results that we can quickly enough access on election night. And again, we always have the paper ballots. But the risk of not having some sort of backup is also there. So it's a great question. And I know it's a concern a lot of people have. And I do want to reassure people that we are we're auditing this process, and we're doing everything that we can to ensure the security of that.
All right. Do you know how many registered voters are in Ottawa County? And then do you know the number of Republicans and the number of Democrats?
That's a good question.
We have 221,000 registered voters, just around there, when I last pulled the numbers, which was a few weeks ago now. So it's an ever-changing database as people move in, as people move out, as voters pass away. That's getting constantly updated. But we are at about 221,000 registered voters. Michigan does not have party registration, though. So all the voters on our rolls here do not have to declare a political party preference when you're registering to vote. The only election where someone is publicly declaring a political party affiliation is at the presidential primary election every 4 years. In that election, there are 2 separate ballots. The Republican nominees are on one ballot, the Democratic nominees are on another ballot, and voters make a choice on their application to vote, both by, if you're voting by mail or if you're voting in person, you make that determination on that application. But otherwise, everyone here is just a registered voter. We do not have party registration.
Thank you very much. Who chooses the audit under the Michigan Constitution for a random hand count of the ballots?
That's a great question. So that process is randomized at the statewide level. So they take the qualified voter file database and basically randomly generate a list of precincts after the election, not before. So we don't know. Actually, it's after certification even, so we don't know who's going to be chosen until after that whole process is done. Yeah.
We audit about 10% of precincts each election, so give or take 10 or 11 precincts. And when we are auditing, it's both the in-person voting and the absent voter counting boards. So we're auditing both pieces to get the full audit of the whole precinct.
As far as like, is there someone that does the random choice?
Yeah, as far as I understand, I understand it's a program that is utilized by the qualified voter file that selects the automatic, the randomized selection, but it's done by the Bureau of Elections staff. So the State Bureau of Elections is delivering a whole list statewide. That's a good question. We can also pick on a local clerk as well and audit them. So obviously, no one who decided to show up tonight will be picked.
Okay, turning the questions a little bit. Are AV challengers allowed to verify signatures? What about the dates? And does this information have to be on the envelopes? So I believe they're asking about if someone is in an absent voter counting board, what a challenger is allowed to do in there.
So the signature is checked by the local clerk ahead of the election day where the ballots are being processed by a counting board. So what gets delivered to the counting board is the ballots that are in the envelopes, and those all have a ballot number on them. On the outside of the envelope, they also have the date that the clerk received that ballot back. And then on the voter section of that envelope, there's a signature piece, and then there's a date, the voter signs and dates. So with the ballots is a list, it's called the AV list. It's a list of voters in that precinct that have returned their absentee ballot. So it's going to have the voter's full name, it's going to have their address, their physical address, and then it has the date that they submitted an application, the date that they were mailed the ballot, and then the date that the ballot was received back. So one of the first things that the absent voter counting board is doing on election morning, or I think used to now saying, or during pre-processing, is verifying, they're checking that ballot number against that list of voters and verifying that the number of ballots that they received at the counting board matches the number of voters on that list.
And I would say it kind of goes back to one of the suggestions I have for transparency. We have other states that do this differently, you know, where ballots are being processed and issued by local clerks. They're being issued by bipartisan teams, and they're subject to observation and challenge, much like they would be in the precinct. And that's not how Michigan law is currently set up. I'm very supportive of a model that will allow for better access to challengers. And again, we got to fund it. It's important.
Follow-up question for that. What circumstances triggered ballot signature verification? How is it performed and by whom?
So every ballot every ballot application and then ballot that's returned is required by law for the signature to be verified. That process happens in the local city or township clerk's office, either by the clerk themselves or their deputized staff. Some of our larger jurisdictions in a bigger election like this will bring on election workers ahead of the election to help them in their office with this process. And then there was a third piece of that I don't remember.
How is it performed and by whom?
How is it performed? So it's a visual check at the local clerk's office comparing to the voter registration database. It's actually one of the areas that I would like to see improved. There are several states around the country that use a software program, that the ballot is run through a software program. In the state legislature, that's a threshold of the ballot, or the signature has to match the signature on file, 80%, 90%, whatever that number is that's set. That's something that I would love to see here. One of the main reasons why we don't have it is because we're so decentralized. It's cost prohibitive to have 1,600 different local jurisdictions issuing and processing absentee ballots in Michigan. It becomes very cost prohibitive to have a software program that does that.
All right, thank you. Poll challengers.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I bet we spent 100 hours collectively today as local clerks contacting voters and asking them to come in and correct and verify their signatures. This is a huge lift for our local clerks. And that's also why I agree with Katie, like we need to utilize technology better. But again, your ballots are issued in your community, they are verified in your community, they're counted in your community. And your local clerk is literally on the phone every single day leading up to an election, calling voters, asking them to come in and verify, sign a document to verify their signature is correct. Elderly people whose signatures change, we have to update those in the file. If you broke your arm, if your signature changed from when you were 16 to when you were 25. So a lot of those processes are happening. It's a big part of the election.
Thank you. We have a clarifying question for you too. Are the challengers allowed to verify a signature? You start with that one.
I believe the signatures are by law required to be in the counting board. And I understand that the signatures may be viewed by the challenger, but the challenger cannot, under Michigan law, challenge a voter's signature on an absentee ballot. That is not one of the challengeable items subject to challenge currently.
Okay, thank you. And if the date is not on the envelope, does the vote count? I believe the envelope of the absent voter return envelope.
It's a good
Like
question.
if the voter doesn't put the date on, or if the clerk does, or both? Does it say?
Let's go for both.
Okay. Good point. Okay, let's go for both. So that is one of the things that we are checking during our post-election audit process. We're verifying that information was completed and filled out properly. Often when a date is missing, the local clerk is contacting that voter to get any needed information, whether it's a signature, a date, any of that corrective information to ensure that the ballot can be processed.
Thank you very much. What is the difference between a poll challenger and a poll observer? And do you have a definition?
That's a great question. So technically the language observer isn't in Michigan election law. So in other states, it's called an observer. Internationally, obviously, we refer to them as observers. So a challenger in Michigan election law has to be appointed by an organization. They have to be a registered voter in the state of Michigan. They have to exhibit a credential, and that credential has to list the precincts that they were assigned to. And they have a right to observe the entire process from behind the scenes, behind the table where ballots are being issued. They see the electronic poll book, the voter's name, the voter's information, the voters filling out their applications, the ballots being issued. They obviously can't be in the poll booth with the voter, but they can see the process play out. And so they're also able to challenge certain things. They're really able to challenge three things. If they believe a voter is not a registered, or excuse me, not a US citizen, if they are not of legal voting age, or if they believe the voter does not reside at the location where they are on the poll book and where they fill out their application. So essentially they are observers, but that language isn't written into Michigan election law. The other entity that we have in the precinct observing on election day are poll watchers. Poll watchers just have to remain in the public viewing area, and any member of the public can be a poll watcher. So you're just designated a part of the public viewing area. So you're not necessarily behind the poll book or the processing table.
You also don't have to be registered ahead of time with an organization to be a poll watcher. And you're also, if you're going to a precinct, you're not sequestered. So if you wanted to visit 5 different precincts during the day, you could walk in, stand in the public viewing area, observe the process, and then head to a new precinct.
So how does a challenger verify if the dates were filled out? And where is there a pile of ballots that was rejected and the voters need to fix? And is there a chain of custody for stuff like this? This is going back to a couple questions ago.
So ballot envelopes are available, they're subject to FOIA. So if a challenger on election day or before election day, if they're in a local clerk's office, cannot challenge the date missing there, but they can FOIA request those ballot envelopes afterwards. And then there's a follow-up. Sorry, you shouldn't read me multiple questions at a time. I forget them.
I'll do one at a time. Is there a pile of ballots that was rejected that the voters would need to fix? And is there a chain of custody for this?
So a local clerk, when there's a ballot that is missing information, they're contacting that voter. That ballot is securely stored until the voter comes in to fix whatever the discrepancy is. If it comes to election day and that discrepancy has not been fixed yet, that ballot does get rejected in the qualified voter file, and that shows on the AV list that's given to the county board. It shows that that ballot was issued, but it was rejected for whatever reason.
Thank you much. What is the training for poll watchers and for poll challengers for political parties? That's first half.
Sorry, I asked for one question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
political parties do their own training quite often, and so they will train. It just depends. So, you know, we've actually worked with both political parties in Ottawa County, the Democratic and Republican parties, kind of going in as we're invited, basically, to give our perspective of election law and the election law perspective of the training. So sometimes it includes election law and what you can and cannot do. The political parties may focus more specifically on issues that they want their challengers to be observing. But again, it's not required. So it could be, it could also not be happening, right? And I think the political parties as a whole usually do this training. It's the outside organizations that challenge that we sometimes just don't know what exact training a challenger gets.
Challengers also, one of the rights that they have is to have a tablet with them on election day while they're challenging. So often what happens is the challenger has a list of voters from that precinct that they're assigned to, and they're using that tablet to check off names. So we see challengers working in that function as well. They're working on behalf of an organization who's working on get out the vote type of promotions.
So if a poll watcher or poll challenger gets out of line, if they're intimidating voters, are there any mechanisms that exist to discipline these individuals?
It's a loaded question. Words there. It's a good question though. So right now, we have not experienced that in Ottawa County. I would say that we have a pretty good relationship with our political parties and our third-party organizations where if there ever was an instance like that, the chairperson of the precinct can talk to the challenger, say, hey, we have a job to do here, you have a job to do, let's work together to resolve this. But again, I can't think of a time where we've had a challenger that needed to be disciplined.
We have a very great relationship too with the entities that are doing the challenging, Republican Party, Democratic Party. And a lot of times we can be an intermediary, or our local clerk can just call the point person for the political party and say, hey, we've got an issue where someone's being maybe a little more disruptive than they should be or whatever. But ultimately the goal is to process voters and for voters not to be impeded on election day as they're casting their ballot. So if anybody in the precinct is interfering with that, then we have a chain of command structure where we can deal with that. But like Katie was saying, it's really not been a problem, and that's a good thing and a healthy thing. I think we emphasize in our training how important it is that we have this transparency and the challenges are accessible and we're accessible to them. So.
Sorry, a little bit of a quick clarifying question. You touched on it when we talked about the challengers. Are phones not allowed in the AV counting rooms?
Good question.
Good question. No, they are not. Right now, yes, I will say right now, no, they are not, because both the workers and anyone observing the process, whether it's a watcher or a challenger, is sequestered. However, it is currently under litigation. So
Secretary of State is being sued right now, and I think it's in the Court of Appeals over this challenger guidance, which really isn't new. It's not new challenger guidance. Been on the books for a while, but it basically says you can't bring no one, including the election worker. We're sequestered in there. This is a part of the transparency that really, I think, just we are operating under way outdated laws for how we do this. This is literally written back for when we received a very small number of absentee ballots and they were tallied by hand. So sequestration was important there because you were literally seeing every ballot. And a lot of times the voter associated with that ballot, sometimes we have processes in absentee county boards now where we really try to delineate between the bipartisan team that's verifying the envelope information is separate from the bipartisan team that's removing the ballot from the envelope and the secrecy sleeve. We're trying to separate so they don't know how John Doe voted. But at the end of the day, these laws were written a long time ago for when ballots were much more visible, and sequestration is, you're literally stuck in that room from the opening to the closing of polls. And that is not conducive to people watching. It's not transparent. What we saw at the TCF Center, which was so, ingrained in people's minds, where, there were people beating on the glass, right? And then suddenly the election workers were putting up cardboard. Well, the sequestration law actually requires the room to not be visible from the outside. And it's very unfortunate. And the poll challengers were in the room as well as outside the room. They had 134 people from each political party or entity allowed to challenge. The problem was that was not a good look for anybody, and that law needs to be changed. So that's my opinion.
So we have someone online who says they were a challenger in Muskegon during the primary, and Muskegon did not sequester them, and they were allowed the phones. What do you do when that happens? Because now it's confusing.
We have to follow the law. So we recommend following the law until we can change the law. And I do recommend that law be changed, because it's difficult. We obviously don't want people like texting. You can't take a photo of somebody that voted ballot in Absentee County Board. You don't want that. But I think it's important to allow enough flexibility in the observation where people are allowed to, where we're basically encouraging the observation instead of discouraging it.
Thank you. We are going to talk about ballot boxes for a little bit now. We have quite a few questions.
Okay.
Starting out, are all the ballot box cameras in the county operational?
My guess is that it's referring to a ballot drop box. Ballot box,
Yes.
okay. I was like, a ballot box to me is what the tabulator sits on and the ballots drop into on election day.
Dropbox, yes.
A drop box, yes. So there was some legislation that passed right before the 2020 election that any new drop box that was installed after that date have a camera on it. Most of our local clerks had already had cameras on their drop boxes at that point. There was some legislation that passed earlier this month that required drop boxes to be under camera all the time. I have confirmed that all 23 of our cities and townships here in the county do have functional cameras on their drop boxes currently. That's a great question.
Are the live feeds accessible via a URL online?
Don't know of anyone off the top of my head that has it available for like streaming, like through YouTube or whatever specific. But all of that footage is subject to FOIA, and it can be FOIA requested.
Thank you. That was a nice question.
Oh, okay.
What is the legal amount of ballots someone is allowed to drop in a drop box?
Very good question. So basically, Michigan law allows for you to deliver an absentee ballot to the clerk on behalf of a voter who is A, in your immediate family, or B, resides in your household. So depending on how much that is, those are the legal requirements on delivering a ballot back. So if I'm a voter, I can have a parent, son, daughter, somebody in my immediate family, or somebody who lives in my house deliver a ballot back on my behalf. So obviously the example, right, that is most commonly done is spouses, dropping off my ballot, my wife's ballot, or whatever when I'm going to the post office or going to the local clerk. So that number varies, but ballot harvesting as a practice, which is basically collecting a bunch of absentee ballots on behalf of other people and then dropping them off, is illegal in the state of Michigan.
So what does one do if they see someone dropping off a lot of ballots?
This is a great question, and we actually had a conversation earlier about this and about the monitoring of drop boxes, basically. So if you witness, and if the drop boxes are in public locations, and if you're witnessing somebody drop off a number of ballots, again, that could be legal, obviously. I'm pretty sure I'm guilty of dropping off my wife's ballot from time to time as well. So if you see somebody doing this, I think there's a couple of options that you have under the process to be fully transparent. For one thing, you can request the information on who dropped off ballots, or whose ballots were dropped off on a particular day. So you can call your local clerk or get this information. Ballots are scanned in and checked in based on the day that they arrive. So those ballots and that information is accessible. You can also check, again, as Katie was talking about earlier, the ballot applications are subject to FOIA. The ballot envelopes can be viewed. The signatures themselves, you can't take a photocopy of under Michigan law, a separate law dealing with identity theft, basically. But that information can be verified, and that's where the signature checking is very important, right? We operate on a very simple principle: one ballot, one voter. One voter only gets one ballot. We verify every signature of every ballot that comes in. So these things can be checked. These things are accessible to the public and open under Freedom of Information Act requests. So yeah, I mean, following up on that would be important. If you see somebody dumping hundreds of ballots into a Dropbox, please do call your local clerk, your county clerk. We will sort that out. That's important. And it's all on footage too. It's all video.
So recently in the news, there have been some reports of people harassing voters, dropping their ballots off at drop boxes. Is this legal?
It's not legal. So voter intimidation, it's actually a federal statute, if I'm correct. There's a federal statute that prohibits voter intimidation. There's been, to my understanding, some litigation about this in other states, but I'm not aware of any in this state.
No, not specifically, but I think, yeah, it's important. So again, these are public areas and people can be in a public area observing. This is all new. When you think about it, drop boxes are not new. We've had drop boxes in the state of Michigan for, I don't know, 75 years. Every local clerk has a drop box where you can drop off your water bill and your absentee ballot if you want to. That has never been new. Also, the U.S. Postal Service has 155,000 drop boxes. They're called post office boxes, and they're all over the country, street corners near you. So drop boxes are not new. What is new is this idea of observing. And if it's a process where people are casting a ballot, technically, this is all new. So we don't really have any legislation that governs how somebody monitors a Dropbox, if they can monitor Dropbox. So you can obviously be in a public place and observe things that are happening on a public property, but it's the point where you approach a voter that it just gets challenging because the intimidation is a federal offense, and rightfully so. And so I think we have to be very careful with how that's done, basically.
Can an elected clerk designate an individual to collect ballots at places such as nursing homes or hospitals?
Nope, so that falls back under the same law that Justin referenced earlier, where someone who can, the only people who can return a ballot for someone else is if it's an immediate member of your family or someone in your household. The only instance that I can think of where a clerk might be, or a deputy clerk might be physically going somewhere and retrieving a ballot for someone is there's a provision in the law that allows for an emergency absentee ballot. So let's say you're planning on voting in person, but you get in a car accident and now you're hospitalized and can't physically make it there, and it's after the deadline to request an absentee ballot. In that case, there is a process set up where a local clerk, you can submit an application for an emergency ballot, and a local clerk or their deputized staff can come to you, assist you with that process, so that you still don't lose your right to vote because of whatever accident occurred.
It's a very election nitty-gritty question.
We've got one. What is the procedure to secure the absentee ballots when they're opened and separated from their envelopes? Seals on ballot bags, who records the seal number, and who checks when the bag is opened for tabulation?
Those are great questions. And again, with this pre-processing, when they're open for tabulation, that's a new thing, right? But there is a process in the legislation for that. So ballots are, again, in bipartisan teams. The absentee counting boards are there. The Republicans and Democrats appointed by election commissions who are sitting there doing that process. So the verification of the signature happens at the local clerk's level, the verification of the ballot number, and the checking off of a voter's name on an absentee voter list is happening by the election workers in bipartisan teams. Then they're able to open that ballot and remove it from the outer envelope. The current law for pre-processing mandates that at that point, once the the stub number on the ballot, every ballot in Michigan has a numbered stub, and that attaches to a voter so that we can verify a lot of things, all right? It's check and balance in the process to make sure the ballot numbers are correct and that each voter's been issued a ballot. That ballot stub remains on the ballot in the secrecy sleeve during pre-processing. So then those are all sealed up into a container. A seal is placed on the container and is recorded in the poll book, and I believe it has to be sent. It's sent to somewhere. It's in the local clerk's office. It's also recorded in the poll book. So it's recorded on multiple places. And then again, you know, the next morning when they're either pre-processing or actually tabulating on election day, they have to verify that that seal has not been tampered with. One of the major challenges that I have with this new law is that actual tabulation, again, is a backup. So for me, it is actually more secure to tabulate early in bipartisan teams with that observation than it is to somehow, what if the seal were tampered with? What do we do with those ballots? We do have a process. We can go back through, check the numbered stubs, verify that the numbered stubs equal the right number of voters and match all those things up. So that's how it happens.
And all of those seals, both during the pre-processing process and then on election day, it requires it. The law requires it to be sealed by one Republican and one Democrat worker. So most often it's a chairperson of whatever political party and then a worker of the opposite political party that are sealing things up together. And then on election night, that stuff before anything's brought to our office, it goes to the local clerk's office. And there's a separate bipartisan team. It's called the receiving board. They're doing a verification to ensure, once again, were things signed and sealed properly.
I guess to follow up, so they're not taking the ballot tab off of it.
Correct.
Okay.
In
Leaving it
pre-processing.
on when they put it in.
As they pre-process it, right? But as they tabulate it on election day, then they have to remove the stub. Correct. So we don't want the big, that's a secret ballot, right? So we don't want a number identifying the ballot to you at the point where it's actually cast. So we don't want to know how an individual voter voted. We just need to have the right number of ballots on the list.
I'll follow up with that too. So we receive a lot of FOIA requests in our office, and one of the items that we receive quite frequent requests for is called a cast vote record. So essentially what that document is a record of how each ballot was cast. So it'll tell you what tabulator that ballot went through. It'll tell you the time of that ballot, the date and time that ballot was tabulated, but it removes that piece as well. So we don't know which ballot is which voter, but we do know how that ballot was read. So if they voted for Joe Schmo and then Jane Smith, we know that is how the ballot was read through the tabulator.
All right. What gun laws apply at polling places?
It's a question that we answer a lot in election worker training as well. So currently Michigan election law does not address guns in a polling place. So what that means is we revert back to Michigan law regarding guns in the polling place, which really is dependent on where the polling place is. In Ottawa County, we do not have any polling places in schools. All of ours are in community centers or churches. So it's up to that governing board. If someone can open carry in the community center or in the church, that is allowed. Someone has a concealed carry, concealed pistol license, they would have to have direct authority, I guess. I don't know if that's a good word to use. Permission, I guess is probably a better word to use, by the governing body of that church.
Thank you. Is there a certification process for equipment by law, such as software updates? And if so, when was the last certification and update?
It's a good question. Yes. So there's federal and state certification protocols that are followed for every voting system and for every system upgrade. And actually, a software upgrade goes through generally months of testing, verification through verified laboratories that are certified under the federal government. And then it comes to the state level for state certification as well. The last upgrade that we received was in May of this
May
year,
and June.
May and June of this year.
What happens if a USB that goes into the machine, the memory drive, is misplaced or lost? Does that get logged into a chain of custody if there is one?
So every memory stick that is placed into a machine has a number that corresponds to it. We keep record of that number, and on election night, as those sealed drives are being brought to us, we're verifying that those numbers match. So we know which device that drive came out of. We also know if the drive matches, where the system will tell us that, and then our records will tell us that as well. And then there was a second piece. Sorry, my brain.
No, you're good. If it is misplaced or lost, does it get logged into a chain of custody?
Yep.
If there is one.
So if for whatever reason it gets misplaced or lost, we have the ability to go back to the tabulator, and there is a hard backup on the tabulator where we can bring a new fresh drive put it into the tabulator and get the results on that new drive. Knowing that we're eliminating a backup option in the way we currently receive results, unofficial results, I am truly excited. I'm really passionate about this GPS project that we're working on. I just think it's the ability to track and know where each and every drive is that the device that contains results. Like, we know the numbers and their serial numbers, and we know that, but we don't know where they physically are. Tying a GPS unit to that drive is far and wide above, I'm just so excited about it. Sorry, I'm really passionate about it because I'm really excited how this program is going to work. It just goes so far in that transparency process as well.
I share that excitement. We're working very closely on the GPS project together. And so the question was from online, and they were talking about the chip, the 4G chip that's in the modem. What happens if that is lost or misplaced? Yeah.
Well, we're tracking those devices as well. So they're all registered and logged, both on the end of our IT department and where the chip is corresponding to with Verizon. We use Verizon for the carrier for our secure wireless transmission, and the modems themselves. So yeah,
they're also sealed into, so they're placed inside the modem device, and then that's sealed under a seal that can be verified. So that's a seal number that's on the tabulator that the election workers on election morning, or the absentee voting counting board workers are verifying, and it's recorded in several different places. So if that was swapped out for whatever reason, we would have record of that.
Thank you very much. Turning a little bit to election day and happens what that looks like. Would a vote for a candidate who was withdrawn be flagged and then spoiled and resubmitted? So what is the process for a candidate who's withdrawn and votes have already been sent back?
So the formal withdrawal deadline happens pretty close after the filing deadline. And that happens well before any ballots are issued. So if a candidate chooses or announces that they are not running any longer, and their name still appears on the ballot, the votes for that person are still counted. So someone would have to decide long before ballots are printed if they want to formally withdraw from the race.
But on the spoiling side, voters are allowed, for example, if you vote an absentee ballot, you're allowed to spoil your absentee ballot up to 4 p.m. on the Monday, right?
The law just changed.
Just changed.
It's now 5 p.m. on the Friday before the election.
Yeah, on the Friday.
That was part of the legislation that changed 2 weeks ago.
So right now, you have the option to go and spoil the ballot. If you know for a fact the candidate's withdrawn, you want to change your vote.
And that's if you've returned the ballot. So if you've already returned your ballot, then you have until the Friday before the election at 5 p.m. If you have not yet returned your ballot, then you do have until 4 p.m. the day before the election. Just to keep it confusing,
At the end of the night, after the polls are closed, when are the results shared with the media, and by whom are they shared?
So we report all of the unofficial results on our website. It's a public website that anyone can access. Most often that is how news organizations are getting the results and posting those to their websites. We go through a process as well on state and federal elections where we are reporting results directly to the Secretary of State. Their website gets updated accordingly, and I know news organizations use that website as well to produce results for the whole state. And that's done by our staff. That's one of Justin's and my main job on election night. A lot of what we're doing is decrypting those through our computer, kiosk computer, and then putting those on our website with the help of our IT department.
Next question is regarding political signs. What are the rules regarding political signs around polling locations, township halls? There's worry about subliminal endorsements.
We love political science in America. So yeah, this came up a lot in the August primary for some reason. This was just one of those elections where a lot of people were really passionate about getting out and actually physically being at polling locations with signs. And that is allowed. It's allowed 100 feet away from any entrance to the building where the polling location is. And
Or the clerk's office.
Or the clerk's office of absentee ballots or on that day, whatever. So 100 feet away, they can be placed there. I think one of the challenges that we had were people, I don't know. I mean, I think it's like this instinct. People see that and they think that it's not supposed to be. And so we got a lot of calls and a lot of people who were upset about the campaigning. But campaigning is perfectly legitimate and okay as long as it's 100 feet away from the polling place. It's a great question.
Also, a lot of signs ahead of election day along roads. In Ottawa County, the Ottawa County Road Commission, the roads that are owned by the county, signs are allowed on those public properties as long as they're not impeding on the traffic signage. So it can't be in front of a stop sign that blocks that sign. So you will see a lot along public roads. You'll see quite a few signs as well.
We've got kind of a broad question. Just talks about East Coast versus West Coast as a result of polls still being open. So election result predictions are broadcast from TV networks. Polls are closed in New York, but are still open in California. So there's worry that some voters may stay home if their candidate is ahead or double down and get out to vote if their candidate is behind. Comments?
Where's the question?
The challenge. I would just say vote anyway. Vote. It is hard. Yeah, I agree. We report results as we get them. And so that's another misconception that a lot of times, like people saying, well, all of a sudden a lot of results showed up on the website. Well, that's because we literally are processing them as we get them. And we're going to get them in a batch, you know, an urban community or whatever comes in. There's a lot of precincts in that batch. There might be a lot of results that just get put on the website at the time that we receive them.
All right, from a broad question to a very specific one, I have an MCL for you.
Ooh.
MCL 168.495, Section F. A statement that the voter is a citizen of the United States is the only requirement of the registration process. Does that mean a person can verbally declare they are a citizen? Or at least right there.
No. Voter registration is covered under federal law as well. And you do have to acknowledge that you're a United States citizen on the form, and you have to physically sign a voter registration form.
Thank you. Can you please go into detail about how you can verify a new registrant is a citizen?
We do not verify. That is on the registrant. So citizenship verification is governed under the National Voter Registration Act and under federal law. And so that is not something that we are able under federal law even to go through a verification check process. So we are, it's a felony to vote if you are not a United States citizen in a federal election or pretty much any election outside of San Francisco. So you have to, and people have been prosecuted for that. What's interesting is we find there are very rare occasions, we haven't had it in quite a while, actually, but over the course of my 10, 15 year time at Ottawa County, we probably handled 4 cases where non-citizens have been inadvertently put on the voter rolls. And let me tell you, there is no one more anxious to come off the voter rolls than a non-citizen who's been inadvertently put on the voter rolls. That will destroy any chance of U.S. citizenship. And so we have to formally, there's a big formal process that you have to go through to get your name removed and then prove that your name was removed and then prove that you never voted if you ever want to be a US citizen. So yeah, so that's something. And the other great thing with the real ID process as well, at Secretary of State level, is now that we have this ID requirement under the federal law, really the real ID requirement requires much more stringent citizenship verification when you go to get a real ID. And those databases are held separately by the Secretary of State for voter registration also.
The voter registration form also has a section on it where a voter has to provide their driver's license or state ID number or the last four of their social security number. That's on there to meet the federal ID requirement. And as people who go to several voter registration events, we often see several people don't have their license on them, don't have their state ID on them, don't know that number, but they do know the last four of their social security number. So we do see a lot of people registering with that number as well.
Thank you very much. What you've touched on this throughout the night, but just another opportunity to, in case you've forgotten something. What protocols, checks and balances, and safeguards ensure that a group of like-minded individuals can never run the democratic process completely? And then what, yeah, same question.
How do we know it's bipartisan? That's how I'm hearing the
Yeah,
question.
how do you stop individuals from grouping together throughout the process to commit election fraud, basically?
So because the process is so bipartisan and so decentralized, there are checks and balances in place that prevent that from happening. One of the things specifically for election workers is you're prohibited from being an election worker if you declare a party on your application, but you're a known advocate for the other political party. So that actually prevents you from being an election worker for, I believe, a year, maybe 2 years. You know that? It's a year. So we know that process as well. We have a lot of social media nowadays, so people post on social media. It's much easier now to know if someone's a known advocate of a certain political party, but declared otherwise on their application.
And this is Katie might be passionate about GPS tracking. I'm passionate about this. We are so fundamentally decentralized. Our election across the United States, and it's a beautiful thing. It's an awesome thing. We have 30,000 election workers in the state of Michigan. And these are people who are your neighbors. They are people in your community. My neighbors work at my polling place. I know these people. And the vast majority, if you're voting in the Bronx, New York, that's the case. If you're voting in Zeeland, Michigan, where I vote, that is the case. And what's so cool about it, and what I always tell people who have questions or who are cynical or concerned with the process, sign up. It is great. It is such a good opportunity. If you're concerned about the chain of custody on your ballots, how about you be the person to go sign off on the ballot chain of custody? It's awesome. And there are eyes watching you everywhere. Like, no one person is ever by themselves in a precinct with ballots or with poll book or with anything else. If you're constantly being watched by your neighbors, by the way. And this is what beautiful, I mean, if you live in Zeeland, you're being watched by your neighbors anyway, but I would say I think it's a beautiful part of the process because I love that part of the community coming together. This is what it is all about. This is what we're doing here tonight. This matters. And so to the 30,000 election workers, I don't know, I see a couple of election workers in the room that I know. Thank you, thank you, thank you. These people get up early in the morning and they stay up until late at night and they do work that is essentially volunteer. You do get paid a little bit, but it is volunteer work and it is God's work, in my opinion. It's really important. And there are a lot of those checks and balances, not only the bipartisan requirements, the requirement to be appointed by an election commission at the city and township level in a public meeting where the names are also sent to the political parties, by the way, before every election. Political parties look at that and check and say, hey, wait a minute, this person is a known D or a known R or whatever. But beyond all of that, you're sitting in a room with people staring at you. You can't really, it is very hard to coordinate an effort of 30,000 people committing election fraud on a statewide scale, pulling that off. I can tell you that.
And then as you move, oh, sorry, I'm adding to that. And then as you move up away from the precinct and the election workers, the board of county canvassers and the board of state canvassers, they're independently appointed, but there are names that are submitted from the political parties. So those names, it's not just anyone applying off of the street. Those names are actually submitted to the counties from the political parties. So that's where we get the names of the canvassers who are appointed to that board as
So
well.
I give a shout out to a canvasser who's in the room as well, Kristen Stamo from here in Grand Haven.
We also have Jim Searles online.
And Jim Searles, awesome.
He's our current chair of our county board of canvassers. That process, well, while we're talking about it, that process is also public. It's subject to the Open Meetings Act. We post about it on our social media and on our website. Our canvassers will be meeting starting at 1 p.m. on the Wednesday after the election. So Wednesday, November 9th, 1 p.m. They're starting the process at the Fillmore Administrative Complex in West Olive. We'll be in conference room E, and I encourage you to join us because we like to have fun while we're canvassing. So we'll entertain you while we're doing it.
Okay, thank you. Why are electronic modems still being installed to our machines when they've been proven to be hackable? And this person says the Penrose report submitted by the Antrim case.
And I think we touched on that, but I just want to mention the Antrim case. Antrim County does not use modems. They do not use modems. So I'm not sure what report they're referring to, but I guarantee you right now, whatever issues happen in Antrim County weren't modem issues. We'd love to have an offline conversation about that, but I think we touched on the modem issue.
Another question, I've talked to multiple clerks and found it alarming that they didn't know about the expert reports submitted to the court from the Bill Bailey Antrim case. Have you read them?
I have read them, and actually there's a whole lot of misinformation, particularly the same report in that case. There was an affidavit submitted by a gentleman named Ramsland, who submitted an affidavit in federal court in that same lawsuit that alleged voter turnout in excess of 400% in certain Ottawa County communities. A complete and utter lie, total lie. And that was submitted in a federal court case. That happens sometimes when people submit affidavits. I'm pretty passionate about it because guess what? The results can only have come from a couple of places, right? The townships and the cities where that came from, and me and my office. And we've audited those precincts and we've counted those ballots. And so I have read the Antrim County case. I'm not going to speak to Antrim County because I'm the Ottawa County clerk, but I can speak directly to the false affidavits and false information that was submitted. That was an attempt to undermine the integrity and the trust of our election process in Ottawa County. And we will stand up against that every day of the week.
Thank you very much. You've touched on this as well, but how do you respond to any accusations that the 2020 presidential election was rigged?
It's a broad question.
I hope I can say this. The proof is in the pudding. I will leave it at that. There have been several court cases that have yet to be held up in a single court of law across this country. The evidence just is not there to support that case. In fact, we, over the last few weeks, have been looking into, I can't speak on it because it's still pending, but we had some names that were submitted to us that we've been working with our sheriff's office to investigate. And every single one of them was a legitimate voter who cast a legitimate ballot.
We have a backup for that. I think it's so important to follow facts. We have to follow facts. And I can't speak for every jurisdiction in the country, right? I'm sitting up here as your clerk. I'm elected by you. I'm the Ottawa County clerk. And what I can say is we get up every day and we focus on maintaining solid, trustworthy, transparent elections in our communities. And we work in conjunction with a whole lot of other people who are holding us accountable, our 23 local jurisdiction clerks and all the people we've been talking about. And I think we have to be able to have these conversations and look at facts. That's why it's so important when that affidavit was submitted in federal court and we could go right to the facts, right to the physical ballots submitted themselves that were sealed up and still, had been sealed up from election night to the results that were audited by a bipartisan team, the Board of County Canvassers. We have to look at facts. And again, I'm speaking here as your clerk in Ottawa County.
And I will add, we appreciate when voters contact us and say, hey, this might have been weird. Can you look into it? We appreciate that and are more than happy to look into any of those cases that we receive.
Thank you very much. We have a couple more questions here before the library is going to close on us. What are the risks and rewards of absentee voting? Isn't Michigan absentee voting really just an early voting system? And what's the difference? And I can repeat.
Thank you. So the absentee voting and early voting are different in a couple of ways. Absentee voting is casting a ballot ahead of election day, but you're putting that ballot into an envelope and it's being counted by a bipartisan board, either the 2 days before election during pre-processing or on election day. Early voting is where a voter is going into what is essentially a precinct vote center ahead of election day, casting their ballot and then actually putting it through a tabulator. So that is the main difference between voting by mail, voting absentee, and voting early. And then
I think the risk reward thing, I mean, I think it's a personal choice, right? I mean, I think we have a lot of processes in place that we need in place to verify the accuracy and integrity of an absentee vote, just like we do in the precinct. But the workflow is actually deeper and it's more complex with an absentee ballot than it is in the precinct. So it's a personal choice for a voter. I mean, I think a lot of voters like to vote absentee. They like to sit down at the kitchen table and use Google. There's a lot of candidates on your ballot. You know, it's a great opportunity. It's flexible. People are busy. They can drop a ballot off when they're done. I like to vote in the precinct. I love to take my kids. I have a 7-year-old and 4-year-old. We make a thing of it. It's a big deal. And I want to show them what that process looks like and inspire them to keep doing it themselves when they're old enough. So it's a preference thing too.
I think one of the risks that I think of is if you're voting by mail and you overvote a contest, say you can only select one candidate and you select 2, you're not there putting your ballot through the tabulator, so you can't correct that and the election workers cannot correct that for you. When you're voting in person, the machines tell you on the screen, hey, you cast too many votes in this race, and you have the option right there in the precinct to spoil your ballot and correct that mistake if you choose to.
Thank you. Last question here for you. What is the weak link in Ottawa County's elections process?
It's a good question. That's a very good question. I mean, I don't know that there's one strength or one weak link, right? And I think as what we were talking about earlier, that everything comes with a risk. And that's why elections is also a human process. And humans make mistakes. This is a whole system run by humans. So we have to have systems in place to check against mistakes. We have to have systems in place to check against fraud and to prevent both of those things from happening. And so it's really important that we maintain those systems and that we make them better. And we've talked about a lot of that tonight as well, about how things could be better. I think challenges and observers need more access to be able to see what we're doing to make it more transparent. But at the end of the day, I think this process belongs to every one of us. This isn't, I can get really passionate, we can get really passionate about it, but it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone here. And this is why, I mean, I'm so appreciative of you guys for being here. I really am thankful for you taking this much time to listen to what some may think of as not super exciting topics, but that really, really are critical to our republic. I think it matters. And so to that end, I hope that we can continue this dialogue. I'd love to, we'll be here as long as Chelsea will let us be here. So if you want to have a conversation afterwards, you can obviously connect with us on social media and email, and we'll be around too. So really appreciate you guys taking the time. It means a lot.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.